I know I've been saying wins and losses don't matter this season, but last night's defeat, yeah, that stung for a couple of reasons, and I'll discuss on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert at SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, I want to go over a few reasons why last night's 4-2 defeat to the Minnesota Twins stung just a bit more than the rest of the defeats the Sox have been having this season. Then I want to discuss Luke Keaschall's two-run game and hot start to his big league career, making the Miguel Vargas trade look even worse. And finally, it's Wayback Wednesday. Let's discuss Phil Humber's day of perfection. All right, so the season was lost the moment the Twins came back to from down 3-0 at Wright Field a few weeks back to win 8-3. That was a game where Shane Smith was humming along and then just suddenly ran out of gas, and then Penn Murphy could not keep the game in hand in the sixth inning. And ever since then, it's just been nothing but bad. I mean, obviously, we knew the White Sox were going to lose a lot of games, but, the beginning of the season, they had homestand. It looked like, hey, maybe they might make some surprises. And obviously, it's turned out the way that we were all prepared for. But at least there's the silver lining of having a shot at the number one pick in next year's draft. And there are three stud shortstops that can be the prize in high schoolers, Grady Emerson, Jacob Lombard, and Alabama's Justin LeBron. So losing a lot is fine this season. Where last year, you didn't have that consolation prize of, well, you lost a record amount of games. At least you're going to get a top 3 pick. Like how, I've had a couple guests on from the Detroit Tigers fan base to tell how Justin Verlander helped turn the franchise around after they lost 119 games. That obviously is not going to be the case this year. But if the White Sox, say, lose 122 games, at least they'll have a shot at a top 5 pick. Now, they still need to get a good player with the 10th pick, but at least there's a silver lining. But still, losing like they did last night, that one hurt, especially since it was Byron Buxton robbing Andrew Benintendi of at least a game-tying double. It had to be Byron Buxton. It just had to be. First of all, there's this rumor that he's always injury-prone. I don't believe it. Well, I do, because obviously it's facts, but it seems like he's always healthy against the White Sox. And normally, he destroys the White Sox hopes and dreams at the plate. But he went 0 for 4 with 2 Ks. But this time, it was just that amazing diving catch to rob Benintendi of potentially at least tying the game. And once again, Variance says no to at least tying the game for the White Sox. Variance just hates the Chicago White Sox. Lady Luck definitely has some relationship issues with the White Sox. You can label it as it's complicated. But Buxton haunting the Sox and the variance of just not having the ball bounce their way makes this defeat hurt. And then on top of that, the White Sox have still not won in Minnesota since 2023. I mean, you got toddlers now walking around that have lived in a world where the White Sox still have not won in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But where this really hurts is it's once again self-inflicted wounds. In terms of a couple of errors, allowing some runs, but most importantly, the inability to come through with runners in scoring position. The Sox went 0 for 8 last night with Jacob Amaya producing a sac fly. That was it. And when you got to, cite Jacob Amaya as doing something at least decent, that's how bad the bats were when it came to being producing in the clutch. They missed an opportunity to score in the 4th with Edgar Carroll at 3rd. Missed a chance to score in the 5th with Nick Maton at 3rd, when Andrew Vaughn grounds into an inning double play. The White Sox have had 198 plate appearances with runners in scoring position. So that's good for 23rd in the league. So obviously not great, Bob, but still not like bottom 5 where they are in pretty much most offensive categories. And that's per Baseball Reference. But the slash line, 168 average, dead last. 260 on base percentage, dead last. 286 slugging percentage, 28th in the league. RBIs produced in those scoring situations, 51, good for 28th. So they're giving themselves chance. And not only that, they're actually pretty good, at least getting 1 or 2 runs at the beginning of the game. That hasn't been the problem. It's just, as you see, coming through. The frustrating part too is when they even have runners in scoring position, they barely put the ball in play. Dead last with a 192 BABIP. And they've only grounded into 6 double plays. So that's the other thing. They're not even letting variance potentially take a hold. Where if you put the ball in play, maybe you get an error. Maybe you get it squeak through. That type of stuff. They can't even put the ball in play when they're got runners in scoring position. And the margin for error is next to nothing, that the White Sox cannot come away with nothing when they get their scoring chances. They just can't keep walking away with either nothing or even 1 run. They got to start maximizing. And Steve Stone and John Triffin were even pointing that out on the broadcast yesterday. They just cannot wait for the home run ball, because obviously when they win, it's usually when they hit a home run. That's been few and far between. But the other thing is, they don't have the talent, so they do have to go from first to third, which Edgar Caro did. They do have to do the double steals. They do have to do all the other little things right. But the one thing they have to do is just produce with runners in scoring position. Come through. And they had them. It was there for them. They just could not produce the runs. They've got to figure out how to come through in the clutch, because the one thing I've noticed, they're doing a much better job when the count gets 0-2. Like, for example, you can cite Luis Robert Jr. still sometimes is inconsistent when it comes to swinging recklessly. And he did strike out twice looking, but I would say that he was still working the count much better, trying to spit at pitches that he thought were balls, and they turned out to be strikes. But even think about this. Edgar Caro, for example, he's down 1-2 on his first hit because he had 3 hits. Instead of still trying to do damage, just flips a single to left, just flicks it, keep the line moving. And for the most part, you're starting to see growth there. Once the count hits 2 strikes, I think that approach has been changed. I think that's the one thing you got to give Will Venable and Ryan Fuller some credit to. That, I think they're starting to see that, hey, once it gets to 0-2, or even 2 strikes, we got to change our approach and just fight for first base instead of fight to do damage. But then they got to do something when it comes to with runners in scoring position. Because, for example, that same inning, Nick Maton, he strikes out on 3 pitches, and he only looked at 4. So 3 or 4, he strikes out, all swinging. To me, that's just being a little bit too aggressive. Jacob Amaya kills the 4th inning rally with a foul out on the first pitch. Andrew Vaughn, 5th inning rally, that 5th inning rally killing double play, 3rd pitch, after having the count 2-0. So I'm not saying spit on every pitch. I mean, obviously, if you see your pitch, hit your pitch. I mean, it's just about a balance, or at least what is the approach? And you just don't feel that approach like I've been seeing when it comes to, like, saying getting 2 strikes. And I think they have to start establishing that process of what are we going to do once we get with hitters at scoring position. Are we looking to do damage? Are we looking to get a run across? I would obviously look to do damage, but what are we doing? And then are they knowing that it's still, okay, once you get down 2 strikes, or even then, just take a breath, relax. Don't get hyper excited like, oh, I got to come through. We're never going to have another opportunity, because you guys have had that mindset of you're going to fight for first base if you can't do damage. And that's the one thing that I think has to be coming here. I mean, now the evolution has to come first is you got to upgrade the talent to get better with runners in scoring position, obviously. But what you can do in the margins right now is you got to figure out something. And if you want to blame Marcus Timms or Grady Sizemore, I mean, obviously they're responsible for the offense, but just something in terms of the approach when they have the RISP, find out what it means to me situation, just has to change. Is it just staying calm? Is it just, okay, what are your pitches that you can hit? Hunt for them. And if you're not getting them, know what to spit on, know what to foul off, and do damage once you get the pitch you see, unless it's 2 strikes. Once it's 2 strikes, just fight for first base. Keep it that simple. That would just be my suggestion. Well, when it comes to upgrading the talent, the White Sox missed a chance at last year's trade deadline when it was rumored the Twins offered Luke Keaschall for Erick Fedde. Instead, GM Chris Getz did not want to help a division rival and acquired Miguel Vargas in a trade that keeps looking awful by the day. And let's discuss how Keaschall could likely haunt the White Sox for a decade, and that's next on Locked On White Sox. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is a reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for the trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. And if you can't tell, I'm still battling whatever plague is going through my house. You know, my wife and daughter have had these inner ear infections, and it just hit me yesterday. Woke up with the chills, woke up just absolutely, just not functional. Went to the doctor. I'm okay in terms of it's just a nasty virus, no strep, no flu, no COVID. But if I sound like, really deep and all that, it's just going through it, folks. But I am more functional today, so that's why I'm here. So I apologize for missing yesterday. I talked to the powers that be. It was like, why don't you just rest? So I think I slept the entire day, except for I did wake up to watch as much as I could of the White Sox game, obviously. And then I watched the replay this morning. Well, if the White Sox were not buried in a building period, I would get Chris Getz's logic for telling the Minnesota Twins no when it came to their offer for Erick Fedde. I mean, I would get it if he had plans to make some quick upgrades in this offseason and had a cornerstone piece like the Royals had. Fine. I get the logic of you don't want to face Fedde the next season when hypothetically you might be making a turnaround like Kansas City did. Basically, if this was Kansas City 2023 and they were in the same boat, I get them saying, no, I'm not going to give you a major league piece now that helps you make the playoffs this year and next year because I plan on making the playoffs, even though I've only got 100, even though I've got 100 losses, I plan on doing some things to get me into the playoffs. So I get that. However, since it was clear there were no plans of that, because Getz announced in September, they were not going to do a lot of heavy lifting in free agency. And heck, the heavy lift was trading Garrett Crochet in part because they were not going to extend him. Rejecting the Twins' proposed offer of Luke Keaschall, that was organizational negligence. I still maintain it. And why I'm revisiting it is because he was a dude yesterday, and he looks the part. He looks like he's going to be a very good Major League Baseball player. First, Keaschall went 1 for 2 with 2 walks and 2 runs scored. He's off to a 5 for 14 start in 4 games, 2 doubles, already has 3 stolen bases. This guy can run the bases well. And think about it. You could have had him long-term with Chase Meindroth as your long-term shortstop, second base duo. Although, again, I don't know if Chase Meindroth should be your should be your shortstop. And I don't know if they even acquired Chase Meindroth, although you should have. And Keaschall can DH, play first base, all that stuff. But that could have been another another foundational tool or foundational piece towards this build. And I found it funny with John Triffin mentioned on the TV broadcast that Keaschall could be a problem for the White Sox for a long time because didn't need to be because they could have had him. I talked about it last year, and it's, just Google it. Dan Hayes of The Athletic reported they were willing to offer Keaschall. He was one of the few top 100 prospects in all of baseball that was dangled at the trade deadline. And imagine having this scouting report per MLB Pipeline in the Sox lineup when it comes to Keaschall. The right-handed hitting Keaschall has quickly developed a reputation as one of the best pure hitters in the minors. He routinely barrels up the baseball and has an advanced approach at the plate, continuing a trend he had in college by limiting strikeouts, 17.2% K rate in 2024, drawing nearly as many walks, 13.4%. He recognized his spin well and has long been a solid two-strike hitter. He's hit over power, but because of his approach and his knack for contact, seeing him get to average pop eventually isn't out of the question. Keaschall runs well with good instincts, so he should continue to be a base-stealing threat. His athleticism has allowed him to move around the field some, though it's unclear where his best long-term home defensively will be. So, he would obviously fit one of the 3 bat-to-ball with speed guys that the ideal White Sox lineup needs. And the Sox said, no, we can't do that because, sorry, we can't help you Twins make the playoffs, even though we'll help you just by losing a bunch of games. Remember, the Twins went 12-1 against the White Sox. And they still didn't make the playoffs. Erick Fedde, he's been solid, but I would have lived with the potential of losing some games to him because you could have a viable piece in the long run. Instead, Getz went with Miguel Vargas, who did not play last night, who is in the bottom 5 of qualified batters for basically all statistical /line right now. Look it up. And about the only thing Vargas has done well this season is field third base, which that's a surprise. He does have 2 outs above average. But otherwise, it's more of the same of what we saw last year, except he doesn't look traumatized to be on the White Sox. A 139, 236, 203 /line, and another example of don't fall for a good spring training. And I'm getting to the point where, I'm ready to pull the plug. And I know there's Vargas bros out there. I know you're out there. You're going to jump in the mentions. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a nugget here first on, I'll feed you on why maybe we can't really fully say it's time to end the Vargas experience. Also, I'll give you the nugget of you probably could have traded Michael Kopech for Vargas and Fedde for Keaschall, and then you could have had the best of both worlds. Could have done that. Instead, you got Jedi mind tricked by the Dodgers, because I'm sure the Dodgers would have been like, you know what? And they're doing the same thing with Altman. They're willing to give up Altman for Luis Robert Jr. They just don't have the patience where the White Sox could, so they could have been like, you know what? Fine. You're willing to give Vargas a runway. We need Kopech to help us win the World Series. Nope. You get Jedi mind trick because they wanted Tommy Edman too. And you could have had Tommy Edman too. That's the other thing. Like, that's where if you just would have separated the two, you could have had some help. Instead, you're stuck with Miguel Vargas, a scratch-off prospect who might be something we don't know, and another scratch-off prospect who has a broken leg. 1 second. But for the Vargas bros, I said I'd feed you. James Fegan of SoxMachine.com. He had a write-up that could point to maybe things getting better about why maybe you might not want to pull the plug here yet. He's pulling the ball more than ever. 45%. His StatCast hard hit rate, 47.5%, is not only a career high, but more than double what he did with the Sox in the second half of last season. While it sure be nice to see him produce 110-plus mile-per-hour exit velocity like the height of his Dodgers prospect helium days, Vargas has hit balls in the first 16 games of the season that have come off the bat harder than any batted ball he produced after his plate last season. After his plate discipline was his one redeeming offensive quality in 2024, Vargas is somehow chasing even less, 17.5%, than before, and once more running a double-digit walk rate. But if Vargas having below-average raw power while rooted to a position where the best third basemen are power hitters is already a source of anxiety. 58 games of watching him in the Sox uniform has already notably lacked pulled hard contact in the air, and it's noticeable that he's lost a tick of sprint speed after bulking up in the winter. Well, then maybe seeing him come up just shy of a monster performance is cold comfort. While we're piling on Vargas is striking out at 27.3% of the time despite not having any real contact issues, because his patience means that his at-bats simply drag into deep count so regularly. What Venable's observation hints at is a hope that some of his two-strike foul-offs stay alive in at-bats turn into line drive as Vargas settles into the long runway the White Sox are affording him. And after the up and down nature of Vargas' last few years play out, the long runway is a lot of the point with how the White Sox are approaching him. So again, there might still be an opportunity, but there are a lot of, and I'm getting there. I'm getting with some folks where it's like, how much more can we take? We've seen this now for 2.5 months where it's just not finding grass and he's not driving the ball. A lot of the optics are there. I agree. But here's the other thing. I'd still prefer Keaschall. And guess what? Even better, you probably could have had both. Well, for Phil Humber's perfect game took place 13 years ago this week. Let's revisit the most unlikely perfecto in baseball history on today's Wayback Wednesday. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce servings has 6 grams of protein, giving you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keeping fuller longer. Personally, I love the no-shell varieties. It's a perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days. My go-to flavors are the roasted and salted or the honey roasted. The roasted and salted are great because it just has that perfect blend of that roasted flavor, but just enough salt where I don't need a gallon of water to wash them down. And the honey roasted, just talk about great flavor. You bite into it, just an explosion of honey goodness. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the end shell options, they're a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever they get their podcasts, as this show is available on all major podcast platforms. Like I said, it's going to be like this for a few days. Just going through the cold. Apparently, I was at the doctor's office. They're saying some nasty viruses are going around. So hopefully you guys are staying well. So I remember I was driving to Chicago the day Phil Humber threw a perfect game on April 12th, 2012. I remember I got a text from my buddy saying Humber has a perfecto going. Okay, so to be fair, you could be like, well, why weren't you listening? I was getting much closer to Chicago as he's ramping up. So obviously I'm getting traffic and weather together on the 8s on 780 WBBM, to make sure could I avoid traffic, and didn't get off in time. So I'm stuck in traffic. So I'm trying to figure out how long am I going to be sitting, before I hit the loop, because I was taking my my then fiance, now my wife, I was taking her down to Chicago for a day trip. I think we were going to a friend's birthday party. I just remember I get the text from my buddy. He's like, you got to turn it on. So obviously I flipped over to the radio call. I hear Ed Farmer's call of history being made by the most random pitcher to ever throw a perfect game. And I like what Eric Adler of MLB.com wrote years later. On April 21st, 2012, Humber was perfect for the White Sox, retiring all 27 batters against the Mariners with 9 strikeouts to achieve one of baseball's rarest feats. You would think to be perfect, you have to be great first. And it's true. The list of perfect game pitchers is mostly Hall of Famers, Cy Young Award winners, and multi-year All-Stars. But it also has Humber, a top prospect turned 29-year-old journeyman who just finally stuck around a big league rotation for a full season. Humber was making his 30th MLB start when he took the mound that Saturday afternoon at Safeco Field. 2 hours and 17 minutes later, he treated 22,472 fans to the 21st perfect game ever, and the third by the White Sox following Mark Burley and Charlie Robinson. Humber's perfecto started innocuously enough. Joan Figgins rolled over a hanging breaking ball. Humber chucked over to cover first for the out, ordinary. But then he struck out the side in the second, and he struck out Ichiro, and his slider was unhittable, and he kept getting the Mariners out 1-2-3. Suddenly, there were 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th, and Humber had gone 26 up and 26 down. The 27th out was the craziest. Humber ran the count full to pitch hitter Brendan Ryan. 1 pitch for perfection, and Humber yanked a slider so far to the zone that A.J. Przinsky couldn't catch it and trickled off toward the backstop. But wait, did Ryan swing? It was a check swing. Home plate umpire Brian Runge nearly jumped out of his shoes making the call. Yes, Ryan went around, strike 3. Ryan was incensed. He turned to argue. If he just ran, he might have been safe. But by the time he turned up the line, Brzezinski had corralled the loose ball and was firing it to the first for that final out. A couple of paragraphs that I wanted to share, but obviously to achieve perfection, you need some luck on your side. But I do remember I saw the highlights later and thinking, man, if Ryan doesn't lose his mind, Humber just has a no-hitter. That's it. I mean, to talk about Mark Burley needed Dwayne Weiss to make an amazing catch. Humber needed a pinch hitter to forget where he was in the game and argue balls and strikes. But obviously Humber was just amazing that day. So I don't want to take anything away from that. But it shows you like what guys need to achieve a perfect game. They just need that little tiny special or the little tiny randomness to get there. And that perfection was the culmination of work with pitching coach Dom Cooper, where Humber had a 3.75 ERA in 2011 with the White Sox. Because remember, Don Cooper used to be the pitching guru. That used to be the White Sox philosophy of he'll fix everything. And he did a lot. I mean, what he did with Gavin Floyd and John Danks was amazing work. What he did with that 2005 rotation, amazing. What he did with Phil Humber in 2011 on that perfect day, amazing. Now, the problem was that perfect game was the height of Humber's career as he quickly cratered after that. He got rocked in his next start, and he ended the season with a 6.44 ERA. People forget about that. But still, for one day, Humber, the number 3 pick in the 2004 draft by the Mets, was perfect, and no one can ever take that away from him. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I'll be back tomorrow with a conversation with WBBM's Rob Hart about another nugget of information regarding the Sox pursuit of a new ballpark. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding the frustrating loss last night, trading for Miguel Vargas over Luke Keaschall, and the Wayback Wednesday going over Phil Humber's perfect game. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at ToddJDub, or at Locked On White Sox. Or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.